Hey everyone, welcome back to the MWOD Hangout. This is a little bit different show. Typically we're interviewing amazing people, and we're not going to break with that today. We've got some really good guests on. I'm just going to give you the cue. TJ Murphy, my co-writer and editor extraordinaire for Ready to Run, probably the most prolific writer about running and all things aerobic suffering, I'll put it that way. The other kid in the screen is, of course, as Glen Cordoza, who is the other half behind the success and the capacities of becoming a Supple Leopard. Now, Glen is the co-writer, organizer extraordinaire, genius behind helping me coordinate my brain to getting on the paper, and I'll just say an expert MMA genius fighter mover in his own right. So what we wanted to do today was basically take a second and say, hey, look, becoming a Supple Leopard came out officially about 2 years ago. Nearly, we're about what we came out with the 20th April. Was that when it was?
22nd, 23rd, somewhere around there.
22nd. Oh, Juliet's pointing out it was her birthday. Of course, like I would forget that. And so we've seen 2 years of the book out, and we've learned a lot since then, and we've seen the application of it, and we want to talk about some of the specifics, and we're going to do a little like Jon Stewart, when Jon Stewart did his own, made his own movie, and then he brought in John Oliver to interview people about the movie. That's sort of what we're going to do with TJ Murphy today. But the reason we're having this context of this conversation in the first place is that May 19th, something special happens, and something that Glen has been killing himself on, and we have been working on for ever since the first book came out, and that's we're letting out of the cage the second edition of Becoming a Supple Leopard. And we want to talk a little bit today about lessons learned and some of the things that you can see in the new book. And this is not by all means a book announcement. What we really want to do is get into the nitty-gritty of 2 years of experience of coming off the road and seeing where this thing has been and in the populations it's reached, and some of the things that we've been able to clarify and advance in our own thinking. So that's the context, that's the setup. We've got Glen Cordoza on one side, we've got TJ on the other side, probably the two guys who know the brain and the model better than anyone else. And what we wanted to do is, again, look at sort of retrospective where we've been, because when Glen and I started this thing, it was like 2011, wasn't it? I mean, Glen, 2010 was really when you first called me about this, and that's a lot of water under the bridge, and a lot of rubber hits the road. So let me do this. Let me turn this over to TJ, and TJ, swing away. Like, take some. Look, Glen and I are here to answer, and I think in the background we've got our guy CJ who's running the internet show. So if you're logging in, want to get some questions, go ahead and go to our YouTube channel at MobilityWOD. You can ask live hangout, or you can go right there at MobilityWOD and ask a question. It'll get picked up, and we'll get reflected back. But in the meantime, 2 years in, lessons learned, hard lessons learned, easy lessons learned, and where we're going, because this is pretty exciting about this next edition, and frankly, just to clear off, it is a radically different book. It's a completely new book, and I'm very, very excited about it. So TJ, why don't you swing away, man? Hit Glen and I up.
Well, thanks, buddy. My pleasure. And I think one of the questions that comes to my mind as someone, my personal collision with all this, I've written about quite a bit, and so I've been riding this wave with you guys because of you guys. But I'm sort of curious about the reaction, the conversation that you started and may have had with your fellow physical therapists, those that are in the sports medicine community. What sort of reaction, insight, have they sparked any sort of additional growth in your thinking along the mobility path?
Let me take a swing at this, Glen. That what we've seen is, prior, I think, to MobilityWOD and Supple Leopard, there was a real gap between acute care and acute level rehab thinking and sort of what we were looking at sports performance. And to my feeling, I mean, I was only one guy in the strength and conditioning world, but there was not a lot of positional integrity maintenance. That, yeah, sometimes, hey, you needed to like flag on the barbell a little bit, or get warmed up, or someone would push your elbows up really hard when you front squatted. But what no one was doing was really saying, hey, look, just because a range of motion is pain-free, we haven't no one was really drilling down and saying that is a complete or normal range of motion. What we saw was that athletes were working with incomplete ranges, incomplete stability, and a lot of the master coaching around that was based on good compensatory coaching and training to solve a movement problem. And in the physio world, the model had been, let's wait till athletes break or have some pain, and then let's try to resolve the tissue dysfunction with very little looking at what the motor pattern was, or the motor deficient issue was, or the restriction that caused this tissue problem, and sort of working backwards. And then the other hole we saw was that people weren't really not taking a very systematic approach. In the clinic, certainly a systematic approach, adjusting joint capsules, sliding surfaces, those tissues, even the neural dynamics and motor control at the lower level. But where we really saw the gap was that the physical therapists are not prepared to handle the volumes of niggling, small, pinche tweaks. And it's actually it's expensive and time-consuming and not really efficient to be able to, every time you just dork your shoulder or tweak your shoulder or have a little kind of a hip tweak in a squat, to go run off and see a physical therapist. What we saw was also that athletes had zero understanding of how their bodies worked or how to try to fix them if they had a tissue restriction. And what we tried to do was translate a new language into athletes being able to understand the components that were missing their restriction or causing their lack of position or their position faulting, and be able to really take a crack at the high-level tissue sort of resolution. And so, I think prior to Supple Leopard, there was very few mobilizations out there that weren't like, hey, roll on a foam roller, or maybe do some myofascial release on a trigger point ball or something like that. But we hadn't seen a real kind of cogent system that went in and empowered the athlete to be able to model their own treatment and home into their own sort of resolution and optimized performance. And the real, I think, pivot in physical therapy has been really to look at what is the inter-session change, not the intra-session change. And so what that means is, I as a physical therapist can do a lot to resolve your own mechanics, but how much are you doing between sessions to take a crack at your own mechanics? And what we've seen is this has created another language for athletes to be able to go home, or physical therapists to even apply these movement principles and the home mobilizations as a home exercise program. And so we really spun up and got a little bit more sophisticated about going after ribs and flossing and restoring joint capsule restrictions, and we've come up with some very novel techniques. Generally, the physios have been very receptive, and the chiros have been extremely receptive. There are, of course, there are some haters out there, but let haters hate. The bottom line is what we've seen is that universally the physios that I've worked with have really come on board and said, hey, this is integrative, and I really appreciate that you have empowered the person to take a crack at themselves so that they're not taking a day off from work and coming into the clinic so I can tell them they have stiff quads. That is not a good use of anyone's time. I mean, do you need a doctor's diagnosis to say you have quad stiffness? No. So that has been, I think, where we've seen the tide change, and the medical profession is slow to react. It's a big ship going in a certain direction, and we've slowly started to see 1 degree of change on the horizon, and physios and chiros and osteos and providers who are becoming better coaches, for one, which has been a real revolution, and two, I think we're seeing that the athlete is being a better pair.
And that makes me wonder, I know you've done some work within the NFL and other professional leagues, and I'm curious to hear what Glenn has to say about the fighting world, but this whole, to me, from the journalistic perspective, is, as you just sort of mentioned, it's this shift of responsibility. In other words, I have a problem in the gym or when I'm running or whatever, rather than just like limping into the PT's office or the sports medicine clinic and go, I hurt, fix me, I want to run tomorrow. One of your primary messages maybe the primary message has been, you know what, you're part of this. It's your investment in yourself is going to pay off not only in your own sort of personal maintenance program, but when you do have to go to the sports medicine clinic, you'll have tried so many things, and you'll actually be speaking a language that will help the PT, the chiropractor out in treating you. And I'm kind of curious where in something like the NFL, where there's so much money at stake, and they're a little more progressive in these things, have you seen some sort of changes in the conversation there? And I'd also wonder if Glenn has seen that in his domain.
Glenn, you want to take a shot first?
Yeah, absolutely. So in fighting and in mixed martial arts especially, technique is paramount to everything. So most fighters, in other words, will focus on making sure that their technique is perfect, right? So what I think the main principles in Supple Leopard help some of the fighters is understanding just the basics. Like, you show me how to perform a proper guillotine choke, or you show me how to perform a proper kick or a punch, but no one ever teaches you how to organize your spine in a neutral position, right? So no one ever tells you that you have to be in, have your shoulder in a neutral position when you're performing a choke to maximize power and prevent, leaking force. And then there's the whole maintenance aspect, which, fighting is one of the most brutal sports. And it's not just the fighting, it's the training, because in training you're actually fighting and wrestling. You're taking hard shots, and people don't have a blueprint for taking care of their bodies, and I think this has helped Forrest Griffin, and a ton of fighters that I've worked with on an amateur and professional level have been able to use the principles very effectively to recover and I think not just recover, but going back to the technical aspect of it, it's taking some of these principles of torque, midline stability, have improved technique across the board. If you look at, for example, if someone's throwing a round kick, one of the most basic and common techniques used in martial arts, it's commonly done from an overextended position, and as a result, most fighters, their low back is smoked, and they don't have a clue why. They're just like, oh, it's just a consequence of fighting. It's not a consequence of fighting. It's a consequence of moving incorrectly, and that's something that a lot of people just don't understand. They just think, hey, this is just a consequence of me playing my sport, but it's not. It's a consequence of you not understanding how to move your body or how to treat your body. So, I mean, even for me in my practice, and I still train. I don't compete anymore, but it's just been crucial to understand. Hey, this is how I need to move. This is and regardless of the context, and this is how I need to. This is the maintenance that I need to perform in order to avoid injury. So it's been huge. It's been huge, and it's helped even my technique and understanding. Oh, I can cultivate more power if my body's in this position versus another position. So it's changed the way that I actually look and perform techniques, because before, when I thought I was doing it correctly, turns out I wasn't organized in the best position possible, and that affected my technique. And I didn't know that. For 10 years of training, had no idea. So
we've seen, one of the good news, because we remain sort of program agnostic, we really feel like it's the local strength and conditioning coach who really has the best feel and handle on how much squatting do I need to do, where's my conditioning needs, do I need to do as much conditioning as I need to do position strength work. And what we've been able to do is, again, by remaining sort of neutral in terms of how much we should be training, I think the bottom line is that we have seen a set of tools given to the strength coach and the athlete that's allowed them to really optimize and explain sort of compensatory patterns. So, off the top of my head, George St. Pierre is a good friend of ours, and we've had the great luck of sort of being able to hang him, and one of the things that he saw was that he was missing some key ranges of his shoulder, and that would leave him a little bit soft on his knockouts, and he couldn't bring his hip all the way through, and it means he was dumping some force out of that back foot, and it would end up causing this twist. And when he got really clean shots, the shots weren't as powerful as they were. They should have been knockout shots, and he made really clean contact. So being able to explain some of those positions to him helps him understand, that's why that matters, and why this has got to be, because this missing range, this compensation is costing me power. When we work with some of our NFL athletes, when we express this language in terms of performance, not injury prevention, and the metrics are wattage, speed, time, weight, what we really see is that athletes start to understand, hey, I'm in a better position and I express, more force effectively. One of the things that's been given that's nice about the book is imagine, I don't think people understand in the life of a professional athlete, you don't have a cadre of people massaging you and stretching you, and it's a really compressed, really ascetic life where there's a lot of meetings and a lot of grinding, and it's a very cool life, but it's not very sexy, and there's not a lot of downtime for you to go ahead and maintain your positions and mechanics. And in sports, we know the injury rate is nearly 100% like the NFL. Athletes need to be able to have a template to be able to solve their problems on their own within the context of helping out their sports performance staff. So the sports performance staff can't handle all the things. They're dealing with the real injuries, which happen in sport. And the other thing is that we've created a model where we've systematically worked head to toe on helping athletes find their blind spots. That they, that's what one of the coins from our friend Jill Miller says. Hey, look, we've systematically said you're responsible for everything underneath the hair to the feet. And I know that your quads are stiff, but you haven't touched your triceps or your T-spine. And so what we've done is, I think, created a language where we have athletes cycling through archetypes, cycling through, looking for problems before they become problems. And that alone, I think, is really a paradigm shift, especially in the pro community, whose immaculate genetics, really, a lot of people don't feel pain, or they just are living with it, or they can perform in spite of it. And giving people this set of tools has been profound. And we have seen it in every major sport. We have got our hands on every big league sport. I mean, just there's none out there that we haven't seen or get to work with some team professionally or their athletes.
And by the way, thanks everybody for joining us, and we're getting your questions in, and I'm going to relay one of them to you now, Kelly. And I'd like to tie this into the next edition you have of the book, and wonder if that will reflect some of this. But Mark Ripito has offered some criticisms, and I know that you've engaged that some. And if you'd like to take us through any clarification you'd like to make, or how you would answer what he has to say about your work.
Well, I think it's important to understand that Ripito was a really important influence of mine and was a good friend. I had the good fortune of literally listening to him coach. I called him up as a young physio student coach and asked him some questions, and he picked up the phone. And as a model for, it's been hugely informative on my understanding of work with the barbell. I think the problem is when we're not advocating necessarily for a style of training. Ripito's real contribution is saying, hey, let's establish some benchmarks around strength so that we can have a conversation about being strong enough, that people were spinning their wheels in conditioning and not making a systematic sort of evolvement towards base strength, and there's some old rules out there: bench 3, squat 4, deadlift 5. And in a big world, those are very reasonable gains and reasonable goals. And most of for example, all of the top CrossFit athletes I know can do that. So when Mark early on, without putting words in his mouth, it was really important for me about saying, hey, let's become systematic about the way we train, so that we can be a little bit more, contiguous. And see some deficits come up. And what we've actually seen in the CrossFit world is that people are very skilled and very strong, and now are going backwards into the aerobic conditioning, like real generally aerobic capacity world. Around my thinking about basic linear progression, which is an old concept and certainly not Mark's. I think I read about with Pavel. But that really remained the cornerstone of our work around rehabbing and putting people under systematic load in a really reasonable way. And that basic linear progression we've seen is the fastest way to take the slack out of someone. Do we differ on styles of weightlifting and how to move? Absolutely. And one of I think the key concepts of the way we think is, we're not looking at barbell training as a means to fitness. We're saying that barbell training is a means to improve function and transfer function to other sports and considerations. We see barbell training as a way of testing rigorousness of position and not just being worried about, hey, am I strong enough and doing this? And for example, I think the big Mark really advocates turning the feet out, because that allows athletes to get to depth and squat. And our contention is, if you admire people out there and get them strong and practice thousands of reps, we're going to see that same foot turned out pattern when they jump and land, when they cut, and that ends up becoming a problem. And so if we don't end up sort of moving towards what we should be able to do, and unless someone has some pathological injury and problem. I think that's where you'll see arguments about that sort of attenuate, because to the point that it's great that we're systematic and working. What we have seen is that athletes can't transfer skills, and also sets up a certain sequela of problems that we don't see when we train for positions as it relates to sport and world and best physiology.
And another little area I think it'd be fun to hear you guys talk about, and I can't imagine when you first put together Supple Leopard exactly what you imagined the response to be, and how well the book is clearly sold and is still selling today. But I actually shared a message I received just yesterday from a good friend I go back a long ways with, an old running buddy in the early 90s, and he's a very good runner. And his name is Mike McManus. He works for Adidas. Back in the day, he was a 2:20 marathoner, 30-minute 10K guy. And he just let me know that he came across MobilityWOD. He read Ready to Run, and he basically said, he called it fountain of youth shit was his phrase. And he's expecting to run a 31-minute 10K this October at the age of 49. And I think, and I know, I'd like to hear, again, maybe from the fighting side, Forrest Griffin, who is on, in the fighting world, he's on the older side, and obviously, maybe one of the things that the messages that your book is out there helping people extend their careers or enjoying being an athlete longer. And I wonder if you guys could talk about that a little bit.
Well, what we've seen is sort of a gross apologetics across sport. That sport is somehow the domain of youth, and windows and light switches start to turn off on your capacity. That means, yeah, you wore out your knee, or that old labrum, or that tweak that you had. There's the bear, by the way. And what we've seen is, that's not true. That what we've seen is that as people have aged, their positions have become more fixed. They've become stiffer. They're making these basic adaptation errors. So at no point do we see tissues stop healing. At no point do we see you can't be bone on bone and miraculously grow bone. There's some things like that are problems. But generally, what we've seen is that when we have positional capacity, we don't need 100% of your window and effect to have a full life. What we've seen is that people are working at 50% or less of indigenous range of motion. That's literally, let me say that clear, 50% or less, that they are so stiff and tacked down, and they're still generating a lot of force for a long time in this little tiny window, and that's the problem. As soon as we give people an additional base of slop, of rotation, of extensibility in their tissues, of how the sliding surfaces slide, I think we've been able to see that athletes who are older are very, very competitive and actually much harder to beat, because they've had a history of competing, and it's really hard to beat people who have been doing it at the highest level forever and ever. And the other issue is that we've seen that, if we can extend the careers of some of our tactical athletes, into their 30s, into their 40s, it really starts to say, hey, look, we've set the bar much lower. Plus, and we can, there's a lot we can do to extend the careers of a lot of our tactical athletes. And, at the same time, there's millions of dollars of training and the cost of taking care of our broken athletes, broken soldiers afterwards. So if we can capture some of this injury prevention, really keep our best assets, best athletes in the field, I think we're going to start to see that we don't suddenly just drop generations. Because right now the whole system is it's a young person's game, and then at some point you stop training or being elite because you're too old. So we have seen profound, profound changes when we have our athletes start focusing on the positional rigorousness. Can you do these normal baseline shapes? I don't think I can remember, Glenn, an age when you're supposed to be able to stop squatting to the ground to take a poo. Can you remember that? There's, the number one reason people end up in nursing homes, they can't get up off the ground. And, there's revolutionary, research that shows that if you can do a push-up, push-up is a good indicator for your capacity and not end up in a nursing home because you can push up. And so what point do we stop training? I think that's really where we've seen a tide shift around capacity and health and pain, and it has been profound, especially working with athletes in their 40s, 50s, and even all the masters athletes we get our hands on CrossFit. It's been profound.
And let's be honest, a lot of athletes, but particularly in the world of MMA, just don't get interest. They're not interested in taking care of their body until something breaks down. And Kelly talks about this a lot, and it spans across all sports. Is I think once you reach your 30s, you start to think, well, my body's starting to break down a little bit more, but I don't have a blueprint to start to solve these problems. And I think that was the magic of becoming a Supple Leopard and Ready to Run, is it gave people a model to start thinking about this stuff. And because, and this goes back to kind of Ripeto's poo-pooing on the whole, like, the squat, open foot versus straight foot debate, is just like, look, we're taking a principle-based approach to performing these movements and these mobilization techniques. So that makes it ubiquitous across all sport planes. So all of a sudden, it doesn't matter if I'm training MMA, it doesn't matter if I play in the NFL, or if I'm just, your weekend warrior CrossFit athlete. It works all the same. And if I'm an older athlete, like, I respond better to this stuff now because I have to do it. I understand that I'm going to be able to train harder if I follow this blueprint. You know what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think the question is sort of, we have been, in the modern exercise physiology science is leapfrogged in a quantum, like, in a crazy way in the last 10 years in terms of connecting the dots and the silos of information coming down and people connecting. What we haven't done a good job of, or we're starting to, is say, what does physical practice mean? I have a physical practice, and we've gotten really experts in nutrition and sleep and strength training and conditioning and stress, and I do yoga and I meditate, and you're like, oh, I'm really confused because all these components are the same part of the physical practice. And I think what we've been able to do with PASL is really make the case that it's part of an athlete's physical practice, or should be, to maintain the health and integrity of their tissues and maintain the integrity and robustness of their positions. And what we've done is, in the last year, I think we've, I can just speak to my own experience, for example, in CrossFit, is that we've seen the general fitness of people, their ability to perform work, go through the roof. What we expect, when I first did Fight Gone Bad, for example, there was 100 people in the room, and this is 11 years ago, 12 years ago, and one person got over 300. One person. And we thought that guy was a god, and I think I was 10th at 280. Like, this is 11 or 12 years ago. Now 300 is a score on Fight Gone Bad that we think is a JV varsity girls rowing score. So I'm that clear that, and not to poo-poo the JV varsity girls because they can now kick some butt. My point is that we have radically seen the language and capacities change. There was an old video of a CrossFit athlete, the guy named Josh Everett, and he is a strength coach with the Navy. He was a high-level Olympic. He clean and jerked 345, and we were all mind blown. And guys are snatching that now and running 5-minute miles. And so I don't think we can appreciate how far the bar has moved along this. And and that's very sort of important to this conversation, because what we expect is possible has really radically changed.
So maybe you guys could talk a little bit about what your conversation has been over the last year or 2 years in terms you sent off becoming a Supple Leopard to the printer, and I know how hard you guys worked on that. I was around, and a word that kept on coming up every time that I interviewed you, Kelly, was we're having this discussion at the dinner table, and that you kind of made the point that you wanted that to be kind of your model for where we go from here. What has been the discussion? What can we look forward to in the second edition?
Well, I tell you, I think that the second that book, we were really limited. That we thought we couldn't do more than 400 pages the first time out. The serious lifting in writing, and editing, and first of all, I'll just say that no one should write a book. It's the worst idea ever, and the least good use of your time, all time. And good thing you have if you're going to write one with your best friend who can live at your house and make it work. And I think the second that book went off, we saw that we had opportunity. Our thinking had already advanced, and our organization of our thinking. We didn't change fundamentally any of the principles. We didn't backtrack on anything that we thought we were wrong on. We were able to sort of continue to evolve the nuances of our thinking around explaining our principles. But one of the biggest pieces, and if you look at the new book, it's about 480 pages, right, Glenn?
Yeah.
So we've added about 100 pages, and nearly we've added a full book to the book. And in that, some of the things we've pulled out some of the old techniques that have just gotten stale, and we found that better techniques forward replace them. Added another, I think, 50 techniques that are really sort of our current palette of treatment and things that we're finding to be sort of our go-tos in the clinic. But in that, I think the most salient conversation is that we're starting to organize our thinking around some of these base archetypal shapes. We were already talking about sort of what are the elemental and fundamental positions in terms of the archetypes, and if you follow in MobilityWOD, you hear me talk about the basic shapes that all the shoulder needs to be able to do in order to be normal. And what we found was that we pulled the book apart and sort of restructured it around these sort of fundamental archetypes, so that it creates an even more simplified language for people to understand the start and finish components to all of their complex movements, and then to mobilize those positions. So instead of saying shoulder sliding surfaces, now it's, hey, here are the sliding surfaces treatments around restoring the front rack position. And that, I think, should make it easier. Plus, we've just added 2 years of practice. We just have gotten, we've been out there working with athletes, teaching our course, working at universities and institutions. And I really think that brings to the second piece that I'll have Glenn talk about, is that we have really, because we put out our manifesto and then have seen it picked, in 2 weeks I'm speaking at Stanford as the keynote for Shannon Turley's first strength conditioning conference. Stanford is one of the biggest universities, most progressive universities around looking at position and taking much more organic view of health around their athletes. Shannon Turley was NCAA Strength Coach of the Year and is extremely progressive. And as a testament that guys like Andrew Luck and still things come back and train with him in the off season. And he's really stood up and said, hey, I'm going to have to show the other universities what we're doing if we're going to really improve the health and wellness of our athletes. So what's nice about Leopard then is we've seen it been adopted at institutional level, and we've seen how coaches and worked with coaches to refine how it fits into their already busy, very robust, very successful program. And that also realized that we needed to add some basic templating and basic recipes. And Glenn, talk about that, because we wanted to say, like, look, there's no recipe, but we realized that people needed a place to start. And Glenn, talk about, because I think this is one of the best parts of the new book.
Yeah, and that's just it. Like in the first book, we really just want to give people the tools so that they can create their own recipe. So here's the ingredients. Here's all the things that you need to know in order to develop and construct your own individualized mobility program. But we realized the shortcomings in that, and we want to take some of the thinking out of it, because there are some prescriptions and some things that you can put together so that you have an immediate model. So instead of having to read, for example, and as Kelly had mentioned, we reorganized the book so that all the principles, all the information that you need to know is contained into one part, part one. So if you read that, it's the system in a nutshell. You have all the tools that you need to go on and move it safely and effectively, and start to perform. Start to maintain your body. But having a prescription, so if I have low back pain, or if I'm missing overhead range of motion.
Glenn, I'm going to give you a specific example. We actually had a question a little bit earlier from someone who had knee surgery, meniscus repair or removal, and he or she was asking, Okay, I want to get into heavy squatting. I believe that that's going to improve my athletic performance. That's what my coaches tell me. How would I use the prescriptions you're talking about? How have you thought about that person in the context of your rewriting?
Well, in terms of the prescription, or in addressing the question specifically, I would have to turn that over to Kelly to answer exactly.
Let me jump in, Glenn,
Yeah.
because for around them, what's nice is that, hey, the question is specific. I'm having a problem, or I need to optimize my squat. It turns out that the squat shape is one of the archetypes that you have to be able to express. In fact, we think unless you can squat with your torso upright, really upright, then we're not going to see normal full capacity around the hip or the ankle. You can hide some of those problems and still get a lot of work done and become very strong with back squatting or front squatting, but the best expression is of function, not necessarily strength, is show me that you can squat with your torso up and down. And so what's nice is that athlete can go to the section in the back and see, hey, this squat archetype, this is me, and can I hit these pieces around the performances around the archetype? Can I identify when my knee comes in that that's a broken archetypal position, or if I'm turning my foot out and my arch collapse, that's a broken archetypal position. If I overextend in the bottom, that's a broken archetypal position. But then also we've created a template of saying these are the mobilizations that we find most effective at improving the squat shape. Now, it doesn't mean that if your upper back is tight, that's not a contributing problem to your ability to squat. And certainly in those archetypal prescriptions, we've addressed upstream and downstream components to it. So, but now the person will be like, squat problem, shoot, oh, hey, I have a problem in my press. Well, we've made it very clear that the press is the bottom position is the front rack archetype, and the overhead position is the finish position. So it gives an athlete a prescription saying, can I get start position? Can I get my finish position around the archetype? So it doesn't take a genius to say, hey, my overhead position, well, that looks like an overhead press. That's where I'm having pain in my shoulder. I should work on the overhead position. And I think that's what's been it's going to be very useful in telling about helping people develop a pattern. And some of it is that we ran out of room. Some of it is just that, we had to put the book out. And what I can tell you is that, one of the hallmarks, I think, of Glen's coaching and training and my coaching and training is that we watched a lot of masters work, and then we're able to start to understand, because we can emulate their work. That's what a beginner does, right? You follow a coach, you start to emulate thinking, you see the pattern. I got to see Greg Glassman program, I got to see Ripito program, I got to see Mike Bergner program, I got to see Louis Simmons program, and I got to see Brian McKenzie program, and all of a sudden I start to understand what basic programming looks like, and that we've done the same thing here. We've really tried to give people basic programs so that they can then start to figure out a language on their own.
Yeah, and not just programs. It's like Kelly said. So if I'm having an issue in the squat specifically, you would go into the squat archetype section, and there you would see a list of all the mobilization techniques that would improve that particular position. And in addition to that, we provided sample prescriptions that deal with specific issues that you might be having. Are you struggling to keep, are you missing hip flexion, for example? There'll be a sample prescription that will help improve that particular restriction. If you're missing, you're missing ankle dorsiflexion in the pistol, well, you can go to the pistol archetype, and there you'll find all the mobilization techniques that will improve that particular position. So it just gives you a roadmap so that instead of just looking at it based on the body, so you can navigate using the area map, because it's broken down into body regions, or you can use the archetypes to help navigate the mobilization techniques, because we created these icons that you'll see throughout the book that help you understand this is the archetype that's included in this movement, and if you're in the mobility section, you'll have the archetype button will tell you what that mobility technique improves. So for example, if you're looking at the couch stretch, that improves the squat, the lunge, and all the archetypes be included in that section. So it just improves improves your ability to navigate the book and helps you understand what you need to do and when you need to do it.
what we've realized is that people really they had no schema for understanding how to take a crack at fixing themselves at all, zero. And the number of emails, cold emails that we get from very high-level professionals trying to solve their problems, found the technique book, found the videos, and these are experts in their field who are miraculous movers and geniuses, but were having problems they couldn't solve. And what's nice about the book and the concept is that a lot of the best athletes in the world are really good at getting prepared for their job. They know how to get in the NFL, but they don't understand sort of how they're working underneath that. So what's nice is that by giving people this set of tools, we've really seen them start to solve their own sets of problems and be able to make it very explicit for them. So we sort of have two issues. One is that we have people coming in who have had no formal training in movement at all. They're learning to squat for the first time. They're learning to deadlift for the first time. They've had back surgery. They've never been athletes. They have no schema for this. And we have very, very sophisticated athletes, who are able to say, hey, I've been training. I know how to get trained, but I don't understand the nuance of maintaining positions or how to undo that. And we've got to address both those. I think we have. I think we really have. Like this book, I think Glenn will agree that we'll leave it. There's not a new one coming out. I mean, this thing is pretty tight and will last. I mean, at least I don't know when we're going to go back into it, but we have a lot of other work to do. But I mean, I think when people see it, it has a black cover. It's very, very different. The layout is different. One of the things I'm most proud about is the illustrations. We have about 60 illustrations illustrating some of the more complex concepts around sequencing the spine and getting organized, around creating torque, anatomy and physiology sort of diagrams so people can see specifically what we're trying to target. And I think it's just a much better blueprint and book, and that's a function of the phenomenal work of Glenn and the team, and also we've been practicing. And if your system doesn't evolve and you're sophisticated, and it doesn't show more nuance and understanding and simplicity, then you either nailed it the first time, which is very unlikely, or you are lying about the sophistication and sort of evolution of what's going on. And it's okay to say, we were less sophisticated 4 years ago or 5 years ago when we started this, and here's our understanding today, and here's the better expression of that.
You know what? A lot of times when we talk about all this stuff, we end up talking about athletes who are struggling with perhaps injuries or past injuries or older athletes. But one of the things I think you've underscored many times, and it's worth mentioning here, particularly if there's anyone new to CrossFit who might be listening in, and I've got the feeling that's the case, that we're not just talking about injury prevention or rehabilitation, we're talking about performance. That's something you say over and over and over. And I had this conversation, I'd like to hear your comments about it, with Neil Maddox, and former NFL player, top CrossFitter now, elite CrossFitter, and that's a world where they're pressing so many boundaries, particularly in competition. It's I'm sure you've got a lot to say about that itself, but what Neil was talking about was training, and the comment he made was that a particular coach he ran into, he could do a heavy squat, but the coach convinced him that forget the barbell, forget the weights, let's perfect your air squat. We're talking about a guy who was probably incredibly strong at the time, and Neil told me that when he took that advice and went and mastered his air squat, the position, the mechanics, all of that, the performance that flowed out of that just blew his mind, and it's become like a core principle of his approach to training and coaching. I just wonder, because I think you've been a big part of that discussion, I wonder if you have any comments on that.
Well, I think the comment is we are ego-driven people, whether we like it or not, and frankly, training should be the way to be able to suppress the ego, to come up against the limits of your positional quality, the limits of your conditioning, the limits of your strength every day, and realize, boy, there's a lot of work to do. This is strength and conditioning is really, and a physical practice is really about physical self-actualization. It's really what this is, and they integrate about breathing and stress and then regulation. What we see is traditionally we have only ever valued weight on the bar, typically, or load as a way of evaluating quality. And because it was unloaded, we sort of poo-pooed it. And I'm not the first person to say you should be able to do these movements unloaded. I mean, that's Gray Cook, that's Gray Glassman, that's the way we teach at level 1. That's what we teach children and progress. But I think really understanding the principles underlying bodyweight movements, because it's harder to express some of that. We put children under load, we put our endurance athletes under load, because it's a way of teaching some of the principles of maintaining stable positions, and we can hide a lot. If you can do that, move well, principally well, with very little load and at speed, that also is a way of informing about sort of the rigorousness of your ability to then extrapolate up. Because what I can tell you is that if you have a squat problem, the first thing I'll do is watch you air squat. And what we can see is, as a diagnostic, means the principles are the same. The issue is that it's just unloaded, or your torso is in a slightly different position. And what we'll find is that the problems that you're making there, you can sometimes hide under a little bit of load because you're pushing against it, or you're in a fixed position. But in those unloaded states, here's an example. Our good friend Carl Powley likes to take good athletes and throw them on the trampoline. And in the air, all of a sudden there's no load, and people overextend, and their shoulders come forward, and their knees do crazy stuff. And you can really see their inability to stay integrated when there's no connection to the ground. And what we've done with the air squat, for example, is in that iteration, my understanding would be that Neil was really able to understand those positions and the efficiency of those low kind of load demands. And that's why those things will never go out of style. That refining your understanding of fundamental movements, of archetypal start and finish position shapes, pays dividends forever. And even with Neil, I suspect that it's a little bit of a moving target for him. He is very strong. And what I can tell you is that one of the reasons we are always refining and going back and touching the corners and making sure that the box is fully colored in is that an athlete changes based on what's going on in their life, what's going on with their family, what's going on with their children, what's going on with training loads, what's going on with injuries and tweaks, competitions. It's a moving target, and you never achieve this perfect nirvana state. All you have to do is jump on a plane to South Africa, and you have just undone your perfect spinal mechanics. So you better have a template to, one, identify the gaps in your system and be able to resolve those positions, because it's constantly moving.
And I've got, I think we have time for one more question here, and this is in regards to the San Jose women's swimming team, who I know you worked with, and I've had a chance to meet them and talk with the coaches. Really impressive crew, and they're talk about being open-minded and interested in experimenting in new ideas. I know that injuries were part of their program kind of before they started working with you and Brian McKenzie, and when they decided to adopt kind of some CrossFit into their program, as well as mobility, as well as swimming technique with Brian, they came under criticism from colleagues, and also basically threats like, you're going to have a bunch of injured girls. And but what happened is you meet these gals, and they look incredible. They've got these their bodies they're not the typical swimming body. They look more like decathletes as opposed to kind of some of the long-distance swimmers you tend to see. And
they come out unharmed. They get out of the pool
right.
without injuries.
Their injury rate went down. And they also adopted diet principles. But the question was, have they, from your working with them, are you really seeing that team, the coaches there, kind of like embrace what you're talking about?
Absolutely. In fact, one of their senior graduating captains is on our staff at our gym right now. It's CrossFit, and is now the assistant coach there. So we, in fact, Sage and I text probably 2 or 3 times a week and are deeper. One of the things that I think what you're seeing is that this is not a construct where the book and the principles have gone is not a construct of our imagination or wishful thinking. We have seen profound effect with the institutional level change, the individual. We are seeing more and more, new young athlete coaches, soldiers come in, coaches come in, physios come in, where we've made lots and lots of inroads and change. What we feel like is over the long haul, it's the localized coach who's going to know how to integrate this program best into their system. And one of the tenets of what we try to do is not necessarily always shout about, hey, look at us, we're here, and we lectured at this place. One of the things we're trying to do is say we work for professional coaches and athletes, and we really try to support their program and the integrity of their program. I would never claim, all I would claim is that we have optimized a lot of people's thinkings around recovering position and optimizing the positional mechanics and explaining some of the phenomena. A good example is the World Athletics Center. As we've worked more and more of those guys out in Phoenix, that's headed by Coach Dan Pfaff, who's one of the supreme running coaches in track and field on the planet for the last gazillion years. I don't know how many national champions and world records he works with, but it's a lot, like all of them. And what I can tell you is that those guys, their practice and the way of thinking looks a lot like our practice, and we've been able to come in and say, here are techniques that make your job easier. And that's where we're going to continue to see the boundaries pressed about what we think is best practice and how people are integrating this already into very, very complex, compressed institutional level changes. So, one of the things that we're really proud of and feel like if you are serious about your program or your methodology, one, be able to explain the principles behind it and how they integrate into all the other issues. You can't just say anymore squatting just makes you a better person. We're beyond that. Everyone's squatting now. The second thing is you need to be able to explain all the phenomenon that you're seeing from injured athletes all the way up to Olympians, from moms and dads down to children. And if you can't draw a connect line between injury and the Olympic medal, then there's a hole in your thinking somewhere. And what we have seen is we can apply these principles at the child level, developmental level, all the way up, and subsequently I think we're having good effect.
Well, guys, I'm told that we need to wrap up a little bit. Kelly, I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you so much. Honored to be a part of this, and appreciate all the good work you guys do.
Thanks, TJ. Well, I'll tell you, we're unveiling some good stuff on the website soon. We're the first episode of our diagnostic series is dropping today, and what we've realized is now that we've given people a chance at cracking themselves, we're showing our work, and we're going to show how people we're solving and continuing to solve, very, very simple problems. If you get a diagnosis, here's how you go. As we have worked our way around more elegant and more efficient, straight to the issue problems, I think that we've realized that we have to continue to create better tools for all of the coaches and athletes working out there. So, kudos to Glen for driving this, and his attention to detail and immaculateness. I am very, very proud of the first book, and I'm proud of the coaches and athletes and the effect it's had in the world, and the number of conversations that it started around things like icing or not icing, about daily maintenance, about what is full physiologic range and capacity. And I'm also even more proud about this next book because I think it's going to stand the test of time as one of the few books out there that actually explains principles behind the physiology, how they relate to different movements, and how we can fix them. I think it's very profound. Glen, anything you want to add about this new book? Because it is badass.
No, just want to emphasize that this is a new book. I think it's more of a new book than it is the second edition, and it's been such an honor to be a part of the process, and the principles that are outlined in the book have changed my life just as much as they've changed anybody else's lives. I can't say enough good things about the system, and I'm very proud of the second edition. I think it's going to make more sense to the lay reader, and I think even people that have the first edition are going to extract a lot of new information from the new edition. I'm very proud of it. I'm very excited for it to release, and just extremely grateful to be involved in this process and to be working with you, Kelly, and you as well, TJ. It's been amazing.
Well, we're going to see, continue to hang out on MobilityWOD.com, as we practice and learn a little bit more. Continues to be our open source, that it's an emergent phenomenon, and the amount of feedback we receive, I think people don't account for that. The comments on YouTube, the comments on the Twitter sphere, the conversations we have with coaches and athletes, our own work with coaches and athletes institutions, it's all expressed in our work, and people, I think, are really should be like they have ownership because they've really driven sort of the continued evolution of our thinking. So, MWOD Hangout, we're so glad to spend some time with you, and thanks so much. We'll see you guys tomorrow.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, guys. Bye, Bear.